May 30th is the day of the 500-mile racing classic at Indianapolis. Each year, this day marks a new beginning in the continuing love story of the automobile in America. A stormy kind of love story, played right out in the open before the eyes of 300,000 spectators. Each year, the world's great automotive talents keep coming back. Men like Andy Granatelli. He started these pilgrimages 23 years ago. He has consistently brought some of the fastest, most innovative, revolutionary cars in history to this mecca of motor racing.
The Indy 500 to us is like the air you breathe. They say that the Indy 500 is the greatest spectacle in racing, and we've been a part of that literally from the 30s until today.
And he wins it for the Granatelli brothers.
I can't think of anything that's defined the Granatelli families more than racing and winning the Indianapolis 500. Indy to us is everything.
This week, the Garage with Dennis is at Granatelli Motor Sports to talk about ignitions and, of course, the great family history behind the name and all that they've done over the last several decades. We want to make sure and thank our sponsors, Craftsman, Made to Make, and, of course, Royal Purple, the performance oil that outperforms. Make sure and get a chance. Check out our social pages, our Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Right now, the show is about to begin.
From our studio in Southern California, the hotbed of car culture, covering all things automotive. Welcome to In the Garage with Dennis. Here's your host, Dennis Pitzenbacher.
Here we are once again in another beautiful location in Southern California with my new best friend, J.R. Granatelli. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
You know, once again, I feel like almost a historian rather than a host, you know, because I think about what we're actually going to have to do to get your family history on tape. I mean, if you're out there, just get a sandwich, get a six-pack, sit down, and get ready for the story because it starts, you know, decades ago. Your family has such a rich history. Talk about the beginning with the three brothers.
Well, you know, I really started in like 1939. And my dad, Joe, then comes Andy, the famous one, and then my Uncle Vince. And they're all 4 years apart, so 8 years between my dad and my Uncle Vince. And my dad started a garage. You know, he was always a kind of a gearhead. You know, when he was a little kid, he would go car to car, and he would basically, you know, everything was so cold in Chicago. They grew up in Chicago, and he would charge you 5 cents or even a dime if he could to basically get your car started. And that consisted of a little WD-40 and a little ether and just get the car warmed up in the morning. And that's really how, that was the makings of it. From there, he started a garage, and you know, they took my Uncle Andy on as his partner, and the rest is kind of history. They just took it to the next level, and then, you know, they built racing engines for the local street rod crowd, and then they built this thing called the Banker's Cadillac, which was really it was called a Fordillac is what they called it. They put a Cadillac engine in a Ford, and it was, you know, super peppy, kind of a gangster mobile, if you will, you know, being in Chicago.
It works for Chicago.
Yeah, it works for Chicago. And my Uncle Andy, always being the consummate marketing guy, you know, he convinced my dad that A for Andy came before J for Joe. So A came before A in the phone book, so they called it Andy Super Service. And Andy Super Service flourished. From there, we basically built race engines. That got us kind of into the boat world. We built a boat engine. We actually won a few races in Lake Michigan.
You were telling me a whole blistering almost 37 miles an hour.
Right, and we actually we set the record that year at 39 miles an hour.
39,
yeah, the record was 32, so that was huge back then.
Yeah.
And you know, someone convinced us to go to Indy, and from there, it blossomed into what we see today.
I wanted to ask you about the Indy era, I guess if you want to call it that, and obviously the relationship and moving into STP and how all that came about. Amazing story.
Yeah, so let's go back and we'll go forward again. So my dad basically built his first car, and the brothers went to Indy. And when they did that, they actually drove the race car from Chicago, from Rockford, to Indianapolis. And when they got there, they pulled the headlights off of it and kind of tucked in the tail lights and did a few little modifications. And everybody laughed at them and said, you know, that thing will never be competitive, you know.
Yeah, you said three guys in overalls showed up.
So there used to be actually used to be a cartoon called the Katzenjammer Kids. And honestly, I don't remember that, but the Katzenjammer kids were essentially these three poor kids that ran around in pajamas all the time. And that's what they nicknamed the Granatelli brothers, the Katzenjammer kids, because they ran around in their little overalls, and everybody was making fun of them, but not until the race started. They qualified 8th. We ended up finishing the race 6th. That was about 1939, believe it or not. And, you know, racing just, it continued on. And in the early 50s, we were approached by STP. Back then it was Scientifically Treated Products was the company. So for all these people that think that it stands for sticky toilet paper or stop teenage pregnancy, which is what I got all through my life growing up, it stands for Scientifically Treated Products. And some people say Scientifically Treated Petroleum. Yeah. So it goes either way. But nonetheless, STP was born. We took the company from its infancy to, you know, obviously probably the most famous oil additive out there. And STP was good to us. It funded IndyCar racing all the way really through the late 70s.
Well, you were one of the few families out there that figured out that you have to have a great business plan to go racing. Because for the rest of us, like myself, we just know racing is a big black hole. Well, we all know racing's a big black hole. Let's fast forward a little bit into the future, because now with the nameplate and the brand, you're doing stuff for every kind of vehicle. I mean, obviously, all the way up into 2005, the Mustang was reborn, at least in a lot of our minds. Right. Then, of course, the Challenger and the Camaro followed. Some of the stuff you're doing, like this 3-valve turbo setup behind here, I mean, you've really taken hold of modern technology with all of this great racing history and combined it into what you're doing now.
Well, you know what's interesting is that I got my driver's license in 1983. That was kind of like really the phase out of the carburetor. So by 85, everything was pretty much fuel injected. So it works perfect for me because although I'm carburetor literate because of my family, the reality of it is that I've always embraced fuel injection. So to me, it's like my daughter. She's 4 years old. She whips out my iPhone and she knows more about it than I do. That's kind of the way I was in the late 80s. I was not afraid of fuel injection. So where my father would look at the car and say, oh, how are we going to make this thing work? To me, it's all I knew. So sometimes to succeed, you have to not be afraid to move forward. I had no preconceived notion. And what you see today is basically, I would say we are state of the art in terms of fuel injection. We make mass airflow sensors, we make ignition cables, but of course the sexy stuff is forced induction. My father owned packs and superchargers for several years. I kind of grew up in the forced induction world. But really in 1998, when I took Granatelli Motor Sports to the next level, it was all about turbocharging. And we now offer turbo kits for everything late model muscle. So anything Ford, Chevy, or Dodge, we got it.
Now, one of the things that was very interesting, and I fought ignition battles in the past with both my personal cars and my race car. One of the things you're doing now, 0-ohm cables, 0-ohm ignition cables. Amazing stuff. I think the next step in this interview has got to be you and I getting into the shop and you showing us some of that stuff. Is that a deal?
That'd be awesome.
All right. Well, next up, we're going to take a run into the shop and I'm going to show you some of the really intuitive stuff that you, right there in your garage, can get horsepower or even better mileage. Let's go take a peek. Before we jump on this 5th gen Camaro here at Granatelli Motorsports, I want to talk about one of my sponsors. Royal Purple's HPS is recommended for vehicles no longer under warranty and for those seeking a higher level of performance and protection. It's fortified with a high level of ZDP anti-wear additives and Royal Purple's proprietary additive technology, Centerlec. Independent tests have shown that HPS outperforms other leading synthetic and conventional oils for gasoline and diesel engines. Now it's time for me to put on the gloves and go to work. One of the things that you would never imagine that could be possibly done again and again and made better is ignition wires. JR, you have done something that I didn't think anybody could do, which is come up with something new and even better when it comes to this stuff. This is really, really cool stuff. Let's talk about these ignition wires. Okay, well, there was suppression wire. Suppression wire really kind of came about in the early 80s with fuel injection. Then people figured out the better stuff was MagCore, and MagCore is still a type of suppression wire, but it's magnesium core. Now where we are today is solid stainless steel core wire. So what's unique about Granatelli is we're running a solid stainless steel cable. It's like running a jumper cable from your coil to your plug. But what makes ours so cool is that we have what's called the magic donut. It's actually a ferrite ring that goes around the outside of the wire, and it basically hides and eliminates all the RFI, which is radio frequency interference, and EMI, which is electromagnetic interference. So like in the old days, you can hear it in your stereo. We don't have that problem at all. Now, this can be applicable to everything from race cars, and you can fight that with ignition systems, especially in something like a Highline purpose-built race car, but it's also applicable to everything from somebody's good old-fashioned pickup truck to their passenger car. Talk about some of the differences in between the two wires we have in front of us.
Well, you remember what they say, it's race on Sunday, sell on Monday?
Yes.
The reality here is the same thing. This was all done and developed in racing, but it has such a great application for the street. Zero ohm loss means that you get 100% of the energy from the coil to the plug. And what that does, that translates into better mileage, on-ramp acceleration, and just better power in general. And that's for all cars and trucks. We have over 600 applications. It's pretty easy, sounds like a lot. What the reality of it is that as soon as a new application comes out, we measure the wire and we make it for you.
Well, talk about the installation on the 5th Gen Camaro here. What are some of the steps? If a guy wants to take these wires, order them from you, this is something that somebody can do in their front yard at any given time. Take us through some of the steps.
The installation is pretty easy. You would just typically remove the doghouse or the decorative cover over the top of the engine, and the next step would just be to remove and replace the wires one for one. So you would take the one wire off and put another one right back on. And our lengths are identical, so it's pretty self-explanatory. The average installation takes literally about 15 minutes.
Well, that's probably going to be our next step, but I wanted to give an idea of what made these so special, because when you look at this, it's really one of those things that it's the mousetrap effect, kind of. You know, you took something and you made something so basic so much better. Was it an idea that you came up with? How did it come about?
Well, actually, again, in racing, solid core wires have been around really since the ages. The original Hemis had solid core wires. The problem was that they made radio frequency interference, so the OEMs, the factory, the original equipment manufacturers, got away from the wire because it had so many negatives to go with the positive of more power. We figured out how to make the best wire work and still be electronic compatible. So what's unique about our product is that the OEMs have had solid stainless core wire going all the way back to the 60s. You know, the Hemi, the original Dodge Hemi had solid core wires. It just had a lot of radio frequency interference. So we actually took a wire that already existed and just made it better, and then we took it to the next level and made it so it would work on all the new fuel-injected cars.
All right, let's get over to the install on that beautiful 5th Gen Camaro. This is just how easy it is. There's basically 3 steps, and JR and I are gonna have this done in about 5 minutes. Obviously, first, is take your oil filler off. JR, you grab the cover there. I would recommend putting that back in. Now, all you gotta do is grab these factory wires out of here. That's one, ta-da. Grab a new one, and I'll have mine done probably before JR gets his done, because it's that simple. I'm just trying to show him up a little bit. And then, on the wire, or excuse me, on the plug, repeat 4 times and you're done. All we got to do now is wrap up the other 7 and get this thing out for a little quick test drive. All right, well, JR wraps up the plug wires for the 5th Gen Camaro. I want to make mention of one of our sponsors, Craftsman. Like every one of these shops we visit, guess what we find? Craftsman tools. Why? Because they're professional grade tools for everything from the professional to the do-it-yourselfer. Make sure and go to craftsman.com and become one of the Craftsman Club members. You can be a friend of mine on the Craftsman Club. The tools are available at craftsman.com and, of course, all of the retailers around the country. Craftsman, made to make. All right, that's going to wrap up our time at Granatelli Motor Sports. I want to thank JR and the entire crew for letting us play a little bit in their shop and learn a little bit about ignition. Before we let you go, I want to make sure and thank our sponsors, Craftsman Made to Make, and of course, Royal Purple, the performance oil that outperforms. Make sure and check out our website, our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram pages. But for now, the last thing I got to do is ride off into the sunset.